Where the River Meets the Stars. In the quiet town of Elmsworth, where the river ran like silver thread through rolling meadows and ancient oaks, lived a young woman named Clara Whitmore. She was a librarian, gentle, curious, and always tucked behind a book, living more in stories than in the real world. Her days were filled with the scent of old pages and the soft murmur of turning leaves. Every Friday afternoon, a man would come in. His name was Elias Hart. A quiet soul with ink-stained fingers and eyes that held the sadness of forgotten songs. He was a writer, though he hadn't written a word in years. Clara noticed him first through the window, always lingering by the poetry shelf. He never spoke more than a few words, always polite, always distant. But there was something in the way he touched the spines of books, as if searching for something he'd lost. One rainy evening, as thunder murmured in the distance, Clara approached him with a book in hand. It was a worn copy of Rainer Maria Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. "I thought you might like this," she said softly. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he smiled. "I used to love this," he said. "Before I forgot how to feel." From that night on, everything changed. They began to talk. Slowly at first, fragments of thought, shared silences, poems scribbled on napkins. Elias told her how he had once written stories that no longer came to him. How he had lost someone he loved, and with her, the will to create. Clara, in turn, spoke of her dreams that felt too fragile for the world. How books had been her refuge since she was a child. Over time, the library became their world. They read to each other under golden lamplight, drank tea beside frosted windows, and walked along the river where the fireflies danced like stars fallen to earth. One evening, under a sky drenched in starlight, Elias took her hand and said, "You brought words back into my life, Clara. And with them, light." She looked at him, eyes filled with warmth. "Then write. Write about the river. Write about the silence between two heartbeats. Write about love." And so, he did. Elias began to write again, pages upon pages filled with emotion, healing, hope. His stories were no longer haunted, but luminous. And in every story, there was a girl with eyes like moonlight and a heart that knew how to listen. Years passed, and Elmsworth changed little. The river still whispered through the town, and the stars still shimmered above. In the library, now expanded and full of new books, a framed photo sat on the counter, Clara and Elias, smiling, arms around each other, surrounded by shelves of dreams. And beneath the photo, a plaque read, "Where the river meets the stars, love found its voice again." Where the River Remembers. In a small riverside town nestled between the misty hills and the sprawling meadows, time seemed to move a little slower. The town of Elmridge was quiet, its streets paved with cobblestones, its roofs red with clay tiles, and its air always filled with the sweet scent of blooming jasmine. Amelia Hart, a reserved and thoughtful librarian, had lived here her whole life. She found solace in the rustling of pages and the quiet whisper of ink. Her days were predictable: early morning tea, opening the town library, organizing shelves, and returning home before sunset. Her world was calm, yet somehow incomplete, like a novel missing its final chapter. Then one rainy afternoon in September, everything changed. He appeared at the door of the library with raindrops on his shoulders and a worn leather journal in his hand. His name was Elias Rowe, a travel writer passing through Elmridge. He asked asked for directions to the old stone bridge, the one said to grant clarity to those who sat beneath it. She gave him directions, but he stayed longer, asking about the history of the town, and then returned the next day, and the day after. Each visit, he brought a story, of places he'd seen, people he'd met, poems he'd written along the way. Amelia, hesitant at first, found herself drawn to his voice, to the way he looked at her like she wasn't invisible. She, in turn, introduced him to the world of fiction, tales of love lost and found, of quiet strength and hidden longing. Days turned into weeks. He began helping her reorganize the library's old archives, brushing dust from forgotten pages. Sometimes, their hands touched over books, and neither would pull away. She started to laugh more, to wear the red scarf her mother had knitted for her years ago. He started to sketch again, drawings of her hands holding books, of the library bathed in morning light. One evening, as they sat beside the river under the golden canopy of autumn leaves, Elias turned to her and whispered, "You make me want to stay." But staying had never been part of his plan. He was a wanderer, born of the road. She was rooted, made of stillness and home. Winter came. The last leaves fell. Elias, torn between his love for her and the call of the world, confessed that he had to leave, but promised to return in spring. She smiled, though her heart cracked quietly inside her chest. "Then go," she said, "and find what you need. But if the river still remembers us in spring, I'll be here." The months that followed were quiet and aching. She waited by the river often, reading the letters he sent, each one folded carefully and inked with longing. Time passed slowly, marked by frost, then thaw, then the first bloom of wildflowers. And then, on the first day of spring, as she shelved books by the window, the bell above the library door chimed. He stood there, a little thinner, a little more sun-kissed, holding a single red tulip. "I found what I needed," he said. "It was you." This time, he stayed. And the river remembered. The last autumn in Florence. In the heart of Florence, where cobblestone streets whisper tales of centuries past and golden light spills like honey over the Arno River, lived a young art restorer named Elena Moretti. She had inherited her love for art from her grandfather, a painter who once told her, "Every brushstroke is a memory. Every color, a heartbeat." Elena spent her days restoring Renaissance frescoes in quiet chapels tucked away from the tourist trails. She preferred solitude, the hum of history under her fingertips. Love, to her, was like a forgotten masterpiece, beautiful in theory, but buried in dust. That was until October, when autumn arrived with amber skies and a stranger from New York named Noah Bennett stepped into her life. Noah was a travel writer on assignment, weary from years of moving city to city. He came to Florence chasing a story about hidden gems, but instead found a quiet chapel near Santa Croce, where he first saw Elena. Her hair tied up in a loose bun, hands delicately brushing centuries of dust from an angel's face. He returned the next day. And the next. At first, Elena barely noticed him. But Noah had a way of asking questions, curious, genuine, and laced with admiration, that slowly chipped away at the walls she had so carefully built. One evening, under a chestnut tree in Piazza Santo Spirito, Elena finally asked, "Why do you keep coming back?" Noah smiled, his eyes reflecting the fading gold of the sky. "Because you make me feel like I've stopped running. From that day on, their days intertwined like vines over an old villa. They visited secret gardens, danced under lanterns during village festivals, and spent quiet mornings at her grandfather's abandoned studio, where Elena began to paint again, for the first time in years. Noah wrote about her, though he never published a word. His notebook filled with sketches of her laughing, words describing the way she hummed Verdi while she worked, and paragraphs he never had the courage to read aloud. But time, like the seasons, does not pause for love. Noah's assignment was ending. They stood together on the Ponte Vecchio one final evening, the sun dipping low behind the Tuscan hills. "I don't want to leave," Noah whispered. "Then stay," she said, but her voice trembled, because she knew he couldn't. He had a life elsewhere. A world of deadlines and distant cities. So, he left. For months, Elena walked alone through the streets they once wandered together. Her paintings darkened. Her colors dulled. Until, one spring morning, she received a parcel from New York. Inside was a book titled The Chapel Keeper. On the cover, her silhouette against the light of stained glass. It was his story. Their story. And with it, a note. "Some people write to remember. I wrote to come home. I'll be on the next flight if you'll meet me by the chestnut tree." That evening, Elena waited beneath the blossoms in Piazza Santo Spirito, heart pounding. And when Noah arrived, breathless, smiling, eyes full of the same warmth she remembered, she didn't speak. She simply took his hand and held it against her heart. Because love, like art, never fades. It only waits to be restored.